You need to register first. I guess so. I mean, when I send an email to you, then what it essentially offers you is a chance to register, and then the software sends you the link.
We registered last year. Maybe do we have to re-register?
Since December, I think we've had a new link. Welcome everyone to our study of progressive stages of meditation on emptiness. So, as always, kindly generate the enlightened intention, thinking what I'm doing here, I'm doing because I'm aware of the suffering there is in the world at large. So that's why we're here. We're not here because we're good Buddhists attending class, or we're doing Buddhist things, or we're interested in Buddhism. We're hopefully beyond that. In undertaking the study of Buddhism, we're not really isolating ourselves from reality. So it's in that sense, I sometimes like to refer to Buddhism as a greater kind of science, because we're not isolating ourselves in data, but we're not subscribing to a particular dogma, but rather we're through you could say, the pointing out of the Buddha, we're looking at reality. And that's essentially what scientists would like you to do, That's the science, we have had right from the beginning, since the ancient Greeks down to the present day. Really, this is what the natural sciences are about. They're about observing reality. We draw our insights not on the basis of something that's been handed down, ideas and so forth. We draw our insights based on personal experience. And where this science here differs from the, you could say, confined materialist science, is that this includes our subjective experience. So this is a kind of science that is equally, you could say, epistemically valid. It's equally valid in terms of penetrating through and assessing something on the basis of what we can verify through experience, but it includes first-person subjective perspective. That's a little bit different from the way that science ordinarily operates, which really is about the third-person perspective. And that's generally how we assert objectivity and also greater, you could say, facticity, that we are more truthful. But at the same time, we can actually observe our mind, and we can actually see, I know it sounds strange, but we can actually see objectively what is happening in our mind. We can assert certain dynamics, certain structures within our experience. We can assess that for sure we have a subject and an object, and we can see that very often the perception of an object, for example, has a lot to do with the way that the subject perceives it. And so these kind of observations, they're not based on just belief or anything. These are things we can verify for ourselves, and so forth. The logic that we have very often, we talk about how, for example, the reality of things, the perception of things doesn't lie in the object, but in the subjective perceiver. So that, for example, somebody's mother is another person's wife, and somebody else's daughter, etc. So these kind of facts is really what determines the nature of what we're doing here. And as such, this is not so much about us subscribing to Buddhism as taking the Buddha as a lead. Somebody takes us to the Grand Canyon and then says, have a look. And then we've seen the Grand Canyon for ourselves. We've seen the Eiffel Tower, we've seen, Uluru, or whatever it might be. Somebody took us there, but then we are actually experiencing it. And the same thing with the Buddhist teaching. We are encouraged to actually look at what's being presented. So in that sense, the subject matter here is far greater than us just limiting ourselves to a particular doctrine or a particular belief or what have you. So, okay, with that in place, then we are then presently engaging in meditation on emptiness is training ourselves in seeing reality more openly, more freely. And so meditation on emptiness is where we begin to look whether the perceptions we have and the phenomena that we have, do they really exist the way they appear? And that's where the Buddha's enlightenment discovered that actually the nature of reality is not the way it appears. Our reality appears as solid, and we are led to believe that there are solid phenomena existing out there the way that we perceive them. And similarly, also, we think of ourself. And despite the fact that we are continually changing, the phenomena out there are continually changing, we latch on to these assumptions that there is something solid about ourself. And that's where we discover, and we are encouraged to discover, the absence of self, the absence of self in the person, absence of self in phenomena. Essentially seeing that phenomena exist on the basis of something that's very big in Buddhism that we call dependent arising, that phenomena exist as a web of causes and conditions that lead to particular perceptions, but phenomena don't exist like that. And so that's where we presently are looking at the Yogacarya viewpoint, or the Chittamatra viewpoint, where we see how actually the mind has a key role in terms of constructing our reality. You know, we have these sort of cliches sometimes where we, you know, even Buddhist cliches where we say, oh, it's all in your mind, you know. And that's fair enough. To some extent, that is true. We've looked last time, and what really runs as a red thread through the study of the Chittamatran doctrine is this three-nature model. Now, in Buddhism in general, we talk about how things appear, what we call relative truth, and how things actually are, what we call absolute truth. Here, we're looking at the way that this relative truth pans out. And we could say relative truth is then the imaginary nature. Absolute truth is the truly existent nature. The dependent nature, that's that nature which we could call our mind, which on one hand can be deluded and essentially stuck in the confused condition where we fail to see the actual nature of reality. We fail to see absolute truth. And that's where we're a sentient being. We're then stuck within the relative experience of the imaginary nature. And that's where we're wisening up. It's a little bit like when we hallucinate and we think there's something there, but actually there's not if we look. So the difference really between what we can call relative truth and absolute truth is simply just whether we actually look. That's the beautiful thing of the Buddha's teaching. So what we can call relative truth, I just made this here before class, but it's essentially intending to just provide a little bit of a handle. Some of you are, you know, probably very familiar with this material, but others maybe not. And for sure, the distinction between relative truth and absolute truth is very interesting, because the distinction really lies in whether or not we are going to examine something. Whenever we begin to question something, we come up against something that some of us might find very annoying, which is complexity. We might see that things just aren't as simple as we'd like to just think of them, you know. It's much nicer to say, so-and-so is a really great person, or so-and-so is a terrible person. That's so easy. But the moment that we begin to question, is that person really that great, or is that person really that bad? You know, then we see, well, it depends, because this person has enemies or friends, and it can be seen in different ways, and it depends what our personal agenda is and so on. So whenever we come to something and we begin to actually apply this thing that we in Buddhism call prajna, the practice of analysis, the practice of actually taking things apart. I'd like to make a little bit of a spot for Elizabeth Mathis Namgyal, who I'm going to have a conversation with on Saturday. And it's actually one of the points that she makes in her book, The Logic of Faith, is actually when we talk about analysis, which sounds incredibly, you could say, intellectual, it's really just where we begin to free ourselves and open up and begin to see things for what they are, rather than getting stuck with a rather sort of immature, narrow view of things. So analysis and examination, this is really the way forward in terms of us beginning to have an open relationship with the world and beginning to see things rather than just sort of lazily sort of retreat into the way that we have opinions and, you know, see things in a one sort of as solidly in one way or another. So that's where the relationship between relative truth and absolute truth is very interesting, because of course within just ordinary, unexamined everyday life, well, sure, then we just talk about things without questioning. But once we discover that our cycle of just naive believing to things to be in a one particular way or another actually leads to a lot of suffering, that's where we begin to actually follow the Buddha's example and begin to actually look and see. And that's where we then could say the absolute truth is when we begin to examine and see the actual nature of things. Now, of course, you might, if you're new to this, you might think, well, is there really an actual nature of things? Well, yes and no. The actual nature of things is that they cannot be grasped, but it's essential for us to understand that. It's essential for us to know that phenomena are essentially empty. And it doesn't mean that they're not there, but they're like a rainbow. They cannot be grasped. We give these examples, like an echo, like a mirage, and so forth. So that's where there are the examples in our lives of things that appear, yet they cannot be grasped. And that's exactly how the nature of things are. So to realize the emptiness nature of things is to begin to understand how they actually abide. We'll be seeing more of this. Anyway, so when we talk about the condition of a sentient being, that's someone who is caught in this imaginary nature. Now to go back to the Yogacaryans. So you see here on the left hand, we have what's called the imaginary nature. And then we have over here on the right hand, the perfectly existent nature. The box itself in its entirety is what we call the dependent nature. This is our mind. And when our mind is obscured, over here in the left-hand corner, the imaginary nature, that's the condition of a sentient being. When it's not obscured, over here in the right-hand corner, that's the condition of an awakened person. So what we do through the practice of the path is gradually diminish the obscurations, and the impure dependent nature becomes less and less, and the innate abiding purity becomes more and more visible, more and more manifest. And that's essentially what we do with the practice of the path. We begin to diminish obscuration and we begin to achieve realization. These are the two qualities of the path. So that's where the transformation from a sentient being to a Buddha takes place on the basis of this dependent nature, our mind. Of course, ultimately, yes, we can discuss whether or not this mind has any reality and so forth, but it certainly is what we need to work with right now. That's why we practice the path, we accumulate merit, we accumulate wisdom, and so forth. Okay, yeah, I think you've had enough of me babbling at this point. Let's get down to what the Khenpo is saying. So when we talk about the dependent nature, that is where we basically are experiencing things. And that's where Khenpo then, the Khenpo then says the dependent nature includes all the 6 consciousnesses and their objects. We discussed this last time. Yeah, the various objects of our senses as well as thoughts, they give rise to various experiences, consciousnesses. So that's where we would say the consciousnesses as well as their objects, all of these, just like in a dream, they appear within the ground nature of the mind. And that's what we call the alaya vijnana. So this dependent nature, it includes all these consciousnesses and their objects, and it also includes the self-illuminating, self-aware stream of consciousness that remains when the alaya vijnana is purified. So that's where we can make some degree of assertion, saying this thing here, which has that sort of warm glow here, that's this luminous nature that once the obscurations are purified, become manifest. So the Chittamatrans thought of this as kind of an absolute. However, this was what the Madhyamikas refuted, okay? So the Chittamatrans, they will essentially say the perfectly existent nature is pretty much the same as the pure dependent nature. So that's where there are, you could say, some gripes. Some people are going to say, well, that's a reality, and others are going to say, well, you know, anything that appears necessarily is by nature a dependent arising. So it is ultimately empty. So that's where there's a little bit of squabbling, but you know, in some way, you'll follow me here. One is more, the Madhyamika is more an ontological project, and Chittamatra is more a phenomenological project. So the Chittamatra is more about the experience. The Madhyamikas, they just want to get the ontology right. They just want to see, well, what is there actually? And from the point of view, what is there actually? Yes, there's emptiness. But from the point of view of experience, in terms of the manifest qualities of enlightenment, we can talk about we can speak about the phenomenology of awakening. So it's a little bit sort of, it's not exactly semantics, but it is something that with, you could say, an aerial perspective, we can actually accommodate both. So, but just to clarify things, which might not always appear to be clarifying, but the Tibetans, they generally adopt this tenet system in which then they refute this position of the Chittamatrans. And so hence the Khenpo says, if you are wondering how the Chittamatrans classify phenomena into the relative and absolute truths, the answer is that in terms of that division of classification, the self-illuminating, self-aware mind is classified as the nominal absolute, meaning this is where we can understand. Like if you look at this, you know, it's fairly sort of, the logic of it is fairly straightforward. We remove confusion. There is an absolute nature, and that nature we can understand. We can understand logically the principle of emptiness. So that's where we talk about this as what is known as the nominal absolute, namjangpe döndam. So then it says here, this nature, even though we are just talking about it conceptually, it is not classified as relative. So, however, since it arises from causes and conditions, it is not the ultimate absolute. And that's where simply what we mean here is that this realization, this comes about due to the practice of the path. And that kind of understanding is not absolute. So it's something about us sitting down, looking at phenomena, understanding that they arise due to causes and conditions. And as such, we have sort of a generic image or an idea that this is really just a category, or it's a way to describe conceptually. It is the nominal absolute. Now, then the Khenpo says the ultimate absolute, Tartu Pe Dömblam, and also sometimes here, if you're into the Tibetan, it's also what we call Namjang Pe Döndam. Namjang, oh, sorry, this is not at all true. This is Namjang Mayin Pe Döndam. So the non-categorical absolute, yeah? This here is then what they refer to as Tatupe Döndam, or the ultimate absolute. That is the truly existent nature, yeah? That is the reality as it is. The truly existent nature, and that is the scope of, you could say, realization. The truly existent nature is simply ultimate, pure, and perfect reality, Yangdakpa, beyond all distinctions and conceptual grasping. So that's where we have this this understanding then of these three in terms of relative and absolute. This here over here is what we call the relative, and this over here at the end is what we call the absolute. Basically, until the very end, we talk about everything else as relative truth. So then the Khenpo then says the imaginary nature is called imaginary because when one applies one's reason and examines the nature of these concepts clearly and dispassionately, one finds nothing real that corresponds to them. So that means any given phenomenon that we examine, we can actually see we cannot find an absolute. I have this lamp, and that for all practical purposes is the lamp that it is and whatnot. But if I examine what is the true nature of this phenomenon, I'll see that this, as well as anything else in my life, is really just something that I label in particular ways. It has everything to do with how me and my friends, we impute a label onto this. But if I take it apart, it's nothing but simply a web of causes and conditions that leads to this particular perception. And hence, it is called the imaginary nature because it only exists in our imagination. And if we, like it says here, then, like I was saying earlier, if we analyze, if we examine, then we find actually nothing really there. So the Khenpo says the dependent nature is said to be real because when one examines carefully, one does find the self-illuminating, self-aware mind. That's the thing, you know, even the one that is doing the examination, we have to say, well, there's obviously somebody there that's doing the examination. There is some mind there, right? So the ultimate absolute is what we found in the ultimate analysis. In the ultimate analysis, one finds no perceiving and perceived entities in the mind, and this is the truly existent perfect purity and ultimate reality. So this is what we find when we analyze, and this is important because this is beginning to become discerning, to become wise, to not be fooled by appearances. So that's where we're interested in this. We're not doing this because we're interested in philosophy or because we're interested in being smart people. We're interested in getting to the bottom of what drives suffering. And suffering is driven by this entanglement in the imaginary nature. And what the Buddha realized is this ultimate absolute, the truly existent nature. Sometimes Western commentators have called Chittamatrin Yogacaryan ideas idealism. So this is within Western philosophy. This is where we sort of abandon the idea of that there's an objectively existing reality and everything is in fact constructed on the basis of the subjective mind. And this is, we have a lot of philosophers from Berkeley to Bertrand Russell who subscribe to that. So then the Khenpo says, this might lead one to think that in some forms of Buddhism, there is the idea of a vast, limitless mind that creates the world like a kind of creator God, and that beings are all linked to this one mind as God might be to his creatures. Ideas like this have long been current in India. The Alaya Vijnana is not like a God because it is a stream of momentary consciousnesses which are not a self or a self with a capital S. So there's not some absolute. There's a phenomenon that plays out. There's a phenomenology in terms of experience in which there's confusion, and there is the place in which consciousness is stored, but it doesn't attain any absolute reality, any absolute value. The Khenpo says the problem with ideas about God is that without the Buddhist teaching on emptiness, one could find oneself falling into the formless samadhis of limitless space, consciousness, or nothingness. And this is where in some spiritual tradition, this is then regarded as uniting with the Godhead, yeah, being one with the divine and so forth. Although there's no danger of getting stuck in such a samadhi unless one cultivated over a very long time, nonetheless, one should be aware that the fact that all Buddhist samadhis that lead to liberation are based upon the realization of emptiness and of not self. Samadhis are not so based. The samadhis that are not so based do not lead to liberation. So that's where there's a big difference between wanting to sort of unite with some great absolute and settle into the peace of that. That's very different from actually wishing to see what there is. So one is essentially, you could say, a condition of absorption, and the other one is to see. And that's where, when we talk about this realization of emptiness, we're talking about this presence of prajna. This is where there's this quality of discerning. And that's where the Buddhist path is about liberation. It's about seeing through the hoax. It's seeing through the assumptions about solid matter, solid self, and so on. So that's where there's a big difference between those paths that are about going into some, you could say, absolute reference point of a Godhead or an ultimate divine nature and so forth, and the Buddhist path, which is about freeing ourselves from any reference to any such you could say place. Something to hold on to. Yeah. Okay. Now there's a bit of a tricky thing that comes up, because sometimes when we talk about Buddha nature, that's where we actually do talk about this nature as, and this is also what we do here in the Rotarian context, we do talk about an absolute, but it's important to understand that this absolute is based on the freedom from conceptual constructs. It's based on the realization of emptiness. And that quality that is liberated at that point, this is then what we refer to as the absolute. But it's very different from retreating into a particular, you could say, ultimate comfort zone. So, the fruit of Chittamatra. Let's see if there's. Okay. Fruit of Chittamatra. The fruit of the wisdom that sees the emptiness of the mind-matter duality is a removal of suffering. Just as dark cannot exist in the presence of light, suffering cannot exist in the presence of wisdom. So the fruit of the wisdom that sees this emptiness, what comes from that mind that has cottoned on to the fact that the mind-matter duality is artificial, is a hoax, it does not exist, it's delusion. The mind that realizes that, and this we initially begin with on the basis of analysis, but then we, on the basis of analysis, critical thinking, and so forth, we integrate this through the practice of meditation, through the practice of not perpetuating this error. And that leads then to the end of suffering. That's where we are free from the things, from the duality that normally keeps us in suffering. So that's just like if you switch on the light, it doesn't matter how long time the place has been, in the dark. It's not as if the place then begins to define itself. Oh, I'm a dark place. The moment you switch on the light, there's no more darkness. So that's where, similarly, also then in the presence of wisdom, then there's no more the cause of confusion and suffering. The first ignorance, the Khenpo says, is to take as a self what is not self. And from this arises the concepts of a difference in substance between self and other. So that's the very first moment of ignorance. This is co-emergent ignorance. This is where the whole thing of samsara begins. We simply just make a mistake. From this duality arise the afflictions, kleshas, of attachment, because then we think self and other. I like that, I don't like that. You know, this is good, this is bad, and so on. So that's where that uniquely has nothing to do with the things out there. That has to do with us, how we would like the other to be, how we would like things to be, our life to be, people to be, the way things work out, how they are. All these things we can say is other, that external to ourselves. But it's uniquely the self that then generates the afflictions, the attachments and aversions and so on in relation to these. And it's on the basis then of these kleshas that we act in particular way and perpetuate karma. So the Khenpo says, with regards to this original ignorance, he says, from this duality arise the afflictions, klesha of attachment to what is dear and aversion to what is not dear. And through attachment and aversion, the klesha and suffering increase. The wisdom that sees the mind is empty of a perceived duality. So rather, the wisdom that sees that mind is empty of perceived duality, i.e. empty of outer perceived entities different in substance to the inner perceiving consciousness. That wisdom that sees that at a single stroke cuts through attachment and aversion and all the associated suffering. So that wisdom, that's where sages, they all of a sudden glimpse something. And there's different than in the degrees of sages. There will be those sages on the basis of seeing this, they no longer are fooled again. Then other sages, they might understand this, but then again, they fall back. And hence, there is then the practice of the path. So as the practitioner who might have some insight, either intellectually or increasingly through experience, then gradually has increasing degrees of realization. So that's where this single stroke, it really plays out in different ways. Either we talk about those who are, you could say, we call it sadhanists. In Tibetan, it's chikcharpa. They sort of just get it, you know. And there are others who are what we call jimkipa, gradual. They get it, but then again, they fall back, and then they attain realization gradually on the basis of experience and realization. So the Khenpo says, on the most subtle level, every moment of consciousness is purified of all stain of ignorance, and there is not even the shadow of the idea of a difference in substance between mind and its objects. So that's where the most subtle level, then the cognitive obscurations are eliminated. So that's you could say the goal of the path. So that's where the Khenpo says that means the mind rests free from all conceptual contrivance based on such dualistic ideas. Such ideas are based on false assertions and denials. Differences are asserted that do not exist, and true nature of reality is veiled. All our confusion is based on grasping outer objects as separate from the inner perceiving mind and taking them to be real in a way that they are not. So we understand that essentially what has taken place is us being caught in a condition of delusion. We think that there's something that in fact isn't actually there. By letting go of all these concepts through meditation on the mind's emptiness of this duality, the veils are cleared away and the light of the wisdom mind, the self-aware self-illuminator is experienced. This is a very profound experience, and even for those who experience it, it is difficult to explain. So this is in general something that is not something that lends itself to language. But that is then what the path is all about. And of course, this is also what we're talking about here is something that is enormous. We're not talking about hey, I'm not really sort of there yet. What's wrong with me? This is, we talk about this in terms of over 3 countless eons, that gradually this is what takes place. But this is what is intended with the path. And this is the you could say, the essential logic of the Mahayana path. Now, with regards to the understanding of this this nature of the dependent nature, the Chittamatrans, it says here, then the Khenpo says, Chittamatrans tried to explain it as a pure stream of self-aware moments of consciousness, but such an explanation falls into a logical contradiction. So that's again where we begin to assert the reality of some consciousness. This is again where we attribute what we call substance to something, and that again we'll see doesn't really hold up. The Khenpo says, because of this, more refined teachings on the nature of emptiness are required before one can realize the true nature of this self-aware, self-illuminating experience. So basically, in terms of what we are unveiling, there are different ways of viewing this. Some will say that there is an actual consciousness, and that is what some Chittamatrans, I would argue it's not all Chittamatrans that necessarily assert this, but Chittamatran, as it's sort of set up here in the hierarchy of the tenets, they're then said to assert this dependent nature as being this pure stream of self-aware moments of consciousness. Method of examination. Reflect on how one has no proof that the outer perceived aspect or object of a moment of consciousness exists independently of the inner perceiving aspect. Okay, so this is where we think there's me here and then there's something out there. An inner perceiving aspect of a moment of consciousness cannot arise without an outer perceived aspect, and vice versa. So that's where we're perceiving table, wall, lamp, and so on. That consciousness obviously takes place on the basis of an outer object, and it's something that is, you could say, private. It's something that we have that takes place within our individual experience. These two, they happen together. Each moment has to have both aspects simultaneously in order to arise. A perceiving consciousness with no perceived aspect of perception is a contradiction in terms, as in an object of perception with no perceiving consciousness. So we have an experience, and there necessarily has to be someone there for that experience, that assertion of wall or whatever it might be, to arise. The Khenpo says one cannot arise before or after the other, having an independent, separate existence, just as dream appearances cannot exist independently of the dreaming mind. So we can just see how there's solid walls, there's solid people and so forth happening in our dreams, but they are really, you could say, co-emergent with the dream condition. Each moment, the Khenpo says, of the dreaming mind arises together with its dream manifestation as its object. The dream manifestation cannot appear before or after its dream consciousness, nor vice versa. So that's where this condition is entirely dependent on the consciousness. In waking life, we deduce from certain patterns of relationship that objects of consciousness exist before and after we perceive them. But this is relative truth, samriti satya. So that's ordinary, and that's fair enough. That's what we normally sort of live with, right? So of course, there's my house. I leave it. It's not like the house goes away when I'm not looking at it. Yeah. When we examine closely, we do not find any such existence in ultimate analysis. And that's where, if I actually look, this thing I call the house, well, then actually, if I take it apart completely, then actually what is labeled as house cannot be found. But of course, my friends see my house and everybody sees my house. This is particularly true for people who have to sort of get to the bottom of mold in their house, where they essentially are actively deconstructing their house. They'll have very profound realization on the basis of this process. Anyway, this is a shared experience on the relative truth and so forth, and so it's valid. The house is there, we still have some actual real estate. But if we analyze, we cannot find anything that can be truly grasped. So it says similarly, evidence offered by others who claim to perceive the same objects as we do does not stand up to minute analysis. We can deduce that in the relative truth, others perceive the same objects as we do, but ultimately every perception of both oneself and others arises and disappears simultaneously with its objects. So that again, does the tree out in the uninhabited forest, does it actually make a sound? Well, we would say it does, because we all have a shared perception of forest, of trees, and how they behave and so forth. So yeah, we would, on relative truth, we would assert. But then again, on absolute truth, we wouldn't even assert the absolute existence of ordinary, commonly directly perceived objects. So the Khenpo says both the outer perceived object and inner perceiving aspect of every moment of consciousness are of the same substance, with no mind-matter dichotomy, just as in dreams. Okay? If you're getting confused, just think we're just talking about relative and absolute truth, whether we're examining something or not examining something. But it's when we examine something that we find that there's nothing there really to be grasped. Now, the Khenpo says, and again, this is him being sort of in conversation with his students, and also being aware of what the sort of the belief system of the modern world consists of. He says some people who think of themselves as scientifically minded believe that the mind is neither the brain or a function of the brain. Believe that the mind is the brain or a function of the brain, and for this reason, there is no essential mind-matter dichotomy. And that's what we could call materialist monism, where we would essentially say it's all matter. Everything that we experience as mind, consciousness, and so on, it's just the firing of neurons, etc. It's essentially, there's nothing else except the mind. So this is sometimes called eliminativism or materialism. This is very common, and this is essentially what the majority of the modern educated population believes. According to their view, everything is explained in terms of the material world. They choose to overlook the qualities of mind that have no relation to matter, such as subjective experience, thoughts, and emotions. Yeah? And that's where there's a little bit of what we call the hard problem then, because that's not really understood. There's a lot of sort of, you could say, mapping of within neuroscience of the workings of the brain in relation to experience and so on. But the distinction between correlation and causation is not quite clear. And certainly the notion of experience and thoughts and emotions, it can be, you could say, explained in terms of materialism, but we, each and every one of us, experience something that has very little to do with the matter. So that's where there's a big gap between, you could say, the propositions of science and the actual experience of individuals. So anyway, if we were to say that thoughts, emotions, first-person subjective experience, it was to arise out of what essentially is not first-person subjective experience and would be arising out of neurons or the brain and so on, then we're essentially stating that out of that which doesn't have consciousness, some consciousness experience could arise. And that is rather a leap of faith, to say the least. And so Khenpo goes on to say, with this example, he says, presumably, they would not take seriously the story of Pinocchio, where a simple piece of matter, a stick, inexplicably develops a mind experience, a mind experiencing hopes and fears, pleasures and pains, and so on. So we're all familiar with the lovely story of Pinocchio, who, when he would tell a lie, his nose would grow very long and all of that. It's a very sweet story. Now, so everybody would say, well, that's just a fairy tale. So then the Khenpo asks, so these scientists that would say that out of, you could say, inanimate, or you could say biological systems, however sophisticated, that there would arise first-person subjective experience out of that. That is effectively exactly the same as the story of Pinocchio. And so the Khenpo says, so why do these materialist scientists not find it strange if subatomic particles, atoms or molecules, started to produce thoughts and feelings? There can be no scientific evidence for such a phenomenon because it represents the semantic confusion of categories. And that is exactly what it is. It is really, you could say, it passes for science, and it is, again, what 95% of the, you could say, educated modern, population would subscribe to, but it is actually a confusion of categories. One is the material, the matter, and the third person, you could say, the objective phenomena, and the other is experience. So here Khenpo is going pretty much at the heart of, you could say, the quintessential divide between, you could say, the spiritual and the materialist science. This is an important point. So he says, linguistically, there is the category mind, and what is not mind, i.e. matter. Matter, or the material world, is what exists out there beyond the senses. If it does not exist independent of the senses, how can it be categorized as material? So how can a material world that exists outside the senses also be the senses that sense and experience it? To say that everything can be explained in terms of the material world does not answer anything. It does not even begin to address itself to the question of what conscious experience is, let alone to the question of what might or might not exist external to it. So these kind of problems science comes up against, and to a large extent, the scientific community, the conscientious scientists themselves, would acknowledge this lacuna, or this gap, this explanatory gap. The problem is that it actually filters down in the popular belief, then, in which people then say, well, there is nothing beyond the brain, and so forth. And that just becomes a dogma that's sort of widely passed around. So that's where this discussion needs to be had. So there, important point. Yeah, see some questions. If suffering cannot exist when wisdom is present, does that mean the wisdom of sages can relieve our suffering when we are in their presence as well? And why in their presence we can often feel more open-minded and clear? Well, the thing is, in the presence of sages, we're sensitive to, particularly if we have respect for the sages. We have respect and openness for the sages, so that at that point we actually begin to connect with the wisdom that we possess ourselves. And there's an openness, there's a flexibility, there's an experience in which ordinary perceptions fall away in the presence of such sages. And that's why there's this contact high, if you like, when we're around great masters. At the same time, unfortunately, the sage can't actually do anything except just show that. This is what we call blessing. And so in the presence of the teachers, there is something that emerges, and that's very valid, but it actually is more that the sage is facilitating something to awaken within ourselves rather than they're doing something to us. So we, of course, maybe have language that reflects some sort of humble appreciation for the sages in terms of please bless me that you may remove all suffering and so forth. But in fact, what is taking place is really just the presence of the sages is enabling us to connect to this wisdom that we possess within, and as such, that we need to, we have to be honest that the sage cannot, wave a magic wand. And so the Buddha said, I have shown you the path to liberation, but liberation depends on your own endeavor. And again, so we have this sort of wish that the sage could do this for us. Again, I was so amused yesterday with Thich Nhat Hanh passing away. His last sort of joke was brilliant, where he says, please don't mourn me, don't make a big deal out of my remains and all of that. Please don't make a stupa for me. And if you make a stupa, please put up a plaque saying, I am not here. and then, but then he says, if you do that, then underneath put another plaque saying, I'm not anywhere else either. And finally, something something to along the lines of, if you do want to, find me, I'm present within your own mindfulness, the breath of your own mindfulness, and so on. Okay, so someone says, hi, I would like to know the self of the person and the self of the phenomena. Do both of them originate from the seventh consciousness, this thought of me, and have nothing to do with the five sense consciousnesses? Thank you very much. They originate from this, well, yes, but then the seventh consciousness originates from the alaya vijnana. So that unconscious, the quality of the alaya vijnana manifests as this seventh, the afflicted consciousness of self. So the very core of all of this is really the alaya vijnana, and what is the basis for that is the original condition of ignorance. So that's where we talk about this co-emergent ignorance, and then what we saw that arises for that, then the kleshas and the karma. Yeah, some Buddhist schools don't believe in primordial original knowing, while other schools says there is this primordial knowing. How can we understand and harmonize with these seemingly different schools are saying? Intuitively, I think they're saying the same thing. You're right. And that's important, because of course, when someone is saying, yeah, there cannot be a primordial knowing, well, that's true, because presently we are very stuck within our ignorance. Yeah, Buddha nature cannot be known. But then again, on the basis of certain conditions and so forth, particularly in the Vajrayana, we would say, yes, this condition can be known, it can be introduced, or we can at least have some inkling on how it walks and how it looks like and how it behaves, so we can infer it. So we say it's a bit like, it's something that it's a bit like, it's there and we can bring it out. So that's why sometimes when the classical image is when we gild a statue, we mix it up with mercury. Do not try to do this at home. They used to do this in the old penitentiary colonies. They would have the prisoners actually gild and do it with this gilding process with working with gold mixed with mercury, and then heating it up, then the mercury would evaporate and the gold would stick. And similarly also, even though we can't know this you could say the nature which is beyond the concepts, there's still processes by skillful means through which this nature can become manifest. Yeah. Okay. Welcome. Oh yeah. Is Khenpo saying that in a sense the mind takes the shape of whatever it perceives, and there is no mind essentially there that is distinct from objects and experience? That's right. So we would say that this perception that arises is, you could say, the manifestation of the alaya vijnana, so that there is this experience of color and texture and whatever, And this all arises within the mind. So yeah, we would say that essentially there is no distinction actually between the object, subject and object. But of course, in relative truth, this is where we are presently, then there is very much the perception that, yes, I'm looking at an orange object, and hence, there is a consciousness that's generated on the basis of that, like we saw in the Abhidharma. So that's where this is where the Chittamatra position is more subtle than the position that says there's something out there and there's something here. Yeah. Where then we're going to continue to see is actually, does that mind then that is experiencing all of this, giving rise to all of that, is this an actual reality? But presently we're saying that it is. Yeah. Can a self of phenomena, can a self of a phenomena exist without a self of person? No. The whole, you could say, condition of imputing reality comes from the ignorance that's basic to the idea of the self of person. So that's where we work on understanding the nature of phenomena, but ultimately we actually achieve the same thing by understanding the lack of self of person. Yeah, you can say it's the error is situated within the subject. Okay, a little bit dense material here today, but I'm sure you can handle it. So when we say Shravakas realize self of a person, they haven't realized self of person. Yeah, selflessness. Well, we would say they understand it partially because they understand that it's constructed, but they would still say that there are these subtle moments of consciousness that are real. They understand that we understand that there's an apparent reality that if we look at it, it really consists of moments of consciousness, yeah? But they would still say these moments of consciousness, they exist as they're real, yeah? So they've already cut through a lot of the constructs that we have, thinking of things in a particular way and so on, but they're still holding on to this subtle phenomena, subtle consciousness. Miss the Abhidharma study. What we'll find some reason. Yeah, look, guys. Somebody very kindly recently sent me a book from Tupten Jimba. It's called Tupten Jimba and John Dunn. They worked on a series called. Hold on. This is such actually a really brilliant work. You should study that. Hold on. It's this is not really for the faint-hearted, but it's so well done. Okay, it's called Science and Philosophy in the Indian Buddhist Classics. Okay, and it's edited by Tupten Jimba, and it's just very, very good. I was just it's too big to undertake as an online study, but really, you could say an enormously valuable contribution to the study of essentially Abhidharma. Yeah. Somehow no other seems more workable than no self. Yeah, but self seems also to be yeah, because we can objectively deconstruct phenomena out there, but we can also see how we in fact it's actually simpler than we might think, that we in fact are also constructs. We're changing every moment. We're continually changing on the basis of what we can call the skandhas, on the basis of our conscious experience and so on. We're just an appearance. We're just this ring of fire, that appears solid. So science and philosophy in the Indian Buddhist classics. Weighty stuff, but very good. And John Donne is really brilliant. Very, very, very interesting. Yeah. And it's one of these books that really, you could say, serve to bridge the divide between Western science of the mind and Buddhist science. Yeah. Straddles both. Okay, I think we need to stop at this point and dedicate. By this merit, may all attain omniscience, may it defeat the enemy wrongdoing. From the stormy waves of birth, old age, sickness, and death, from the ocean of samsara, may all beings be freed. May bodhicitta, precious and sublime, arise where it has not yet come to be, and where it has arisen, may it never fail, but grow and flourish ever more and more. So, thank you. What we'll do now is just have a couple of minutes break, and then I'll speak a little bit about meditation, and then we'll do some practice together. It'll be a little bit shorter just while we're doing it online, so we'll conclude a little bit earlier than normal. Okay. So welcome back, and I'll just say a few things about the practice of meditation. For all the complexity or that really comes with analysis that we have in Buddhism, all of these are really just intended for us to not be deceived by appearances. So you could say the philosophy that we have in Buddhism is more about us becoming wary of what is not valid. So we're encouraged to develop a critical attitude with regards to our assumptions. And what we're actually being directed toward is experience. But the understanding of experience needs to be expansive. And that's where the ordinary understanding we have of experience is that we do experience a sense of self and we do experience a sense of other. But what we're encouraged to do through the analysis is one, see that these realities, they actually don't hold on one hand. That's, you could say, the analytical approach. And like Elizabeth Mattes-Namjel says, this approach with analysis is really about us setting ourselves free from some ideas. So that's, you could say, the analytical approach, intellectual approach, scientific approach, if you like. But there's another more intuitive approach, which is we can also see that when we're relaxed and not too caught up in ourselves, not too caught up in grasping with regards to the phenomena around, either rigidly, you could say, disliking things or being attached to things and so on, we can see that actually we're much better off. So this is something that we intuitively can just see. We're much more relaxed and easygoing when there's not this tightness, this uptightness. Chilinobu Rinpoche, he was very, Chilinobu Rinpoche had a great, just like Chögyam Trungpa, he had a very great sense of many masters, also Tsongsa Khyentse Rinpoche, very sort of good grasp of the usage of some of our words in the West. And of course, this understanding of the words is not like as per the dictionary, but it's not just how people are using it. And I remember he liked the word uptight. And he would sometimes tease his students about their uptightness. And uptightness is something that really rings true. I know uptightness from firsthand experience. Uptightness is something that takes place instantaneous in situations. So unless we're very alienated from ourselves, we know uptightness when it's taking place. It's that sort of place where it's sort of like, there's sensitivity, and that is really where there's this sensitivity about me in relation to other. Then there's moments when we actually don't have that. So job interviews, going into a large assembly, public speaking, meeting the in-laws, whatever it might be, we know we can feel that, as opposed to when we're with people that we're relaxed with or in a place that we like, we're relaxed. And then again, lack of uptightness. So all along, we can see places in which the mind has varying degrees of just being, you say, flourishing, and the qualities of the mind also flourishing. When we're uptight, we're not particularly well functioning. We might be able to perform on the basis of adrenaline and whatever, but we're not, our brilliance is not really unfolding. And when we're relaxed, very often, even when we're not pondering or being particularly directed at a project, very often brilliance occurs. And very often we are at our best. So we have in the Buddhist context, we have both an understanding that directs itself towards the analytical and also the intuitive. And that's where we essentially, with philosophy, we want to see how we want to become clear how it is that we actually are misunderstanding reality. And it's really just intended for us to let go. Just like somebody, we might have some neurotic worry about something and somebody says to us, oh, just relax, there's not really, look, for this reason, this reason, this reason, you should relax, all very rational reasons that sort of, might not be easy to digest if we're feeling particularly worried. But if we think about it, it might actually alleviate our worry and see that there's not basis for us worrying. So that's where the role of philosophy really is, for us to begin to sort of see that the assumptions about ourselves and about what's happening, they're not really founded on anything solid. And that's where then when we're meditating, we're actually not, in principle, when we're meditating, we're actually training ourselves in no longer getting caught up in these patterns. Now, to do that, to work effectively with the mind, then we need to first have a foundation of what we call shamatha. There needs to be a place in which we are actually present. Because there's the whole situation around our suffering is aggravated by the fact that we're not really here. We're not really actually present. We're lost in thought. And this attains an enormous authority on us. All these thoughts, they achieve so much authority. And that's where we begin to define ourselves in the way that we think about ourselves and so on. So that's where both our relationship to the world and the relationship to ourselves is so much goes through this filter of narratives that we have. And that's where meditation is actually where we take a fresh look in which we are actually not perpetuating the ordinary ruminations and ideas and concepts. But to do that then requires that we actually connect properly with you could say this fresh space of not being caught up, or you could say lost in thought. So that's where shamatha comes in. Calm abiding comes in as the practice where we ground ourselves, and we do this through having some reference point. Sometimes I was listening to His Holiness Dudjom Rinpoche, and he was recommending, you know, when you settle the mind, just be like, and you often have this in the Dzogchen and Mahamudra teachings, just be like a person who has completed a job and feels this satisfaction. But that might not be so easy for us. We might not just be able to sort of come down and right away sort of be in that space of, you could say, simplicity. So that's where it's quite helpful. Of course, that is what we wish to achieve with shamatha, and that is essentially a very sane place to be. And it's what we refer to as abiding, nepa. That is something we need to familiarize ourselves with, but initially it's very, very helpful if we then have a method for doing that, for actually being present. And that's where there's a danger if we're just leaving it without any reference point, that we're just wondering, saying, is this it? Is this it? Am I now in the nature of mind? Is it this? And rather than do that we have some method, and that's where the attention to the breath cannot be overestimated, how valuable that approach is, because it's not conceptual. It's the place where we go out of our heads. Despite we might sit and meditate and look like it's something, you know, not connecting with you know, reality, it is. And it's where we are not lost in thought, but we're actually present through directing our attention towards something that is not conceptual. And that's where the breath is so helpful. So to initially have this practice of just coming back to the breath, very, very valuable. And that cuts through the ordinary entanglement in thinking. We might not even know how caught up in thinking we are. And that's where the practice of meditation, we need to do it. Otherwise, we're never going to begin that journey. We need to first find out how much we're lost in thought. People very often they begin to meditate and they get hugely frustrated because, you know, everybody else in the room seems to be incredibly blissful and and happy and serene. And that's very annoying, you know, and there you are, and it's the same old domestic thoughts that you're having. And you think, I'm throwing in the towel. I'm giving up on this. This is impossible. You know, not only am I not peaceful, but I think I have more thoughts when I sit down to meditate than I normally have. And that's simply just because that we become aware that we are thinking continually. But the beauty of it is that, and that's where the instructions on shamatha, they are so important, because that's where there's something we can do about it. And that is, yes, we can be aware of the thoughts that we have, but we also don't need to tag along with it. And that is where we can direct our mind to the breath. And as much as we might have all sorts of thoughts, we don't necessarily have to be distracted by the thoughts. Coming back to the breath means that they lose their power. They do lose their authority over us. They don't control us. And that's where we actually begin to stage a little bit of a rebellion, because until now, conceptual mind has ruled us. The moment that we begin to simplify the mind by just being attentive to the breath, the thoughts lose their power. The whole idea of these sort of narratives and storylines and essentially the ruminations that we are held by, they lose their grip on us. And that's why the practice of meditation is radical, and it's essential, particularly if we're practicing the Buddhist path, to wholeheartedly practice shamatha, to begin to relinquish this, or rather discontinue this submission to our habitual patterns. So we need to understand how we're ruled by thought humbly, and then we need to do something about it. And that's where we then practice shamatha. We practice the practice which, in terms of the physical, is sitting, putting ourselves on a cushion, and sitting straight, having good posture, good head and shoulders, and then we're aware of the thoughts that arise, but we're not tagging along with them. A thought might come up, gosh, I need to do this. And we're just aware, okay, there was that thought, and it came with a big exclamation mark, back to the breath. Another thought comes up, back to the breath. And at that point, we're not in any way suppressing or ignoring or anything, but we're infusing the whole experience, setting it in context, in a much wider perspective. We're gaining an aerial perspective. And that's where thoughts lose their strength. And the degree to which we actually apply that and thoughts lose their strength, we speak about vipassana. We speak about us being discerning and no longer held by these the control that thoughts normally exert on ourselves. So this is what we do when we meditate. So as we sit, and what we do here in this particular context is that we practice Jamgön Kongtrul, which is Buddha sadhana, and that creates a very particular atmosphere. And like I was talking about earlier, this is what we refer to as blessings. The moment that we think of the presence of the Buddha, this aligns with the Buddha within. So it's very, very helpful all along on the practice of the Buddhist path to continually have this presence of the sacred, or that which is not held by confusion. So we invoke the teacher, we invoke deity, we invoke the Buddha, we invoke the sages of the lineage, and so on, all the time invoking something that in one way appears as something external to us, somehow can be quantified within the relative experience, but at the same time it touches on something that goes beyond. It touches on that which is not held by confusion. So thinking of the Dalai Lama, or thinking of our Guru, or thinking of the Buddha, this enables us to actually have some qualitative experience of the condition that lies beyond the ordinary confused mind. There was a question in the last session of somebody says some traditions, they don't believe that we could actually know this pure mind. That's a valid point, because we are to such a degree actually held by the ordinary confused mind. But there are ways in which we can do this. And it's true, this mind, the pure mind, lies beyond the scope of the ordinary conceptual mind. But at the same time, if there's devotion, if there is this openness and the mind stops, and there's just this deep appreciation for the wonder of the Buddha, or the wonder of the teacher, then actually there's something that's touched within ourselves that has nothing to do with ego, that has nothing to do with the ordinary impure mind. So there is a way in which we can connect with this. It doesn't mean that we have the realization, but we can connect with it. So that's why beyond this sadhana here is referred to as the treasure of blessings, the treasury of blessings. So we we practice this invoking the Buddha, and then at one point, then we just simply consider that the Buddha, the wisdom of the Buddha, eliminates all our confusion, and we simply are freed from confusion once and for all. You could say we gain insight into the wisdom that no longer returns into confusion. So that's where we then settle, and that's where we then do the practice of shamatha vipassana. There's a little bit of, sometimes people refer to this practice as shamatha, sometimes shamatha vipassana. It's inevitably when we do shamatha, something loosens in terms of the conceptual mind, and that is vipassana. For us to have vipassana experience, there has to be some degree of calming the mind and actually allowing this insight to sort of settle. So we need shamatha. So they very much come inseparably. So yeah, that's kind of what I have to say. Is there any questions? Right on. Right on, brother. You know, even a structure, and you know that's why you say, why build something like Borobudur, you know? Because that again also, it speaks about this, the greatness that lies beyond the ordinary. And so all along the, you know, in ancient cultures, you know, and sometimes it was aligned with a belief in God or some greater cosmic authority. In the Buddhist context, it's really just about Buddha nature, the sublime, the uncontaminated, unconfused. That's why building these great stupas, actually, these are edifices that reflect this, you could say, vipassana, this greatness of the awakened condition and all the countless qualities that go with it. So that's why there's a lot of value in terms of having sacred art around us. Because sacred art, it continually actually infuses us with this awe of the beauty that is the natural quality of the unconfused condition. So there's a lot of power in the Buddhist art, and that's also why in Vajrayana sadhana there's a lot of emphasis continually on invoking the sacred nature of reality, and that the sacredness of reality lies in that it's essentially all these things that appear to us. They never have moved. They've never moved from the original condition. They ultimately exist as, you could say, empty reflections. They are the unity of appearance and emptiness, and as such, they're intrinsically pure. So whatever phenomena there are in our world, they are intrinsically pure. And Vajrayana sadhana and all these sort of great edifices and so on, they're really just speaking to us, saying, you know, reality is greater than we habitually think of it. So there's so much value in this, you know. Is it more effective to practice Ngundu first, then Shamatha Vipassana, or the other way around? Well, we do it all along. We can't actually, it's impossible to practice any Buddhist meditation without Shamatha and Vipassana. So we, for example, in the Ngundu practice, at the beginning, we have for example, the waking up in the morning, that's invoking the teacher, settling the mind. The blessing the body, speech, and mind in terms of sitting, expelling the stale prana, invoking the presence of the teacher. That also achieves the same objective. Again, really with the practice of Nundro, all along there is this combination of calming the mind and also invoking that which is beyond the ordinary mind in the form of the teacher or in the form of the deity, the field of refuge or Vajrasattva and so on. So it works together all along. Okay, we'll just take 2-minute break and then we'll begin the practice. Thank you. Okay. In the Samadhi Sutra, it is said, those who while walking, sitting, sleeping, standing or sleeping, recollect the moon-like Buddha will always be in the Buddha's presence and will attain the vast nirvana. And his pure body, the color of gold, beautiful, is the protector of the world. Whoever visualizes him like this practices the meditation of the Bodhisattvas. In keeping with this, we should practice remembering our incomparable teacher, the Lord of Sages, in the following way. In the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Supreme Assembly, I take refuge until I attain enlightenment. Through the merit of practicing generosity and so on, may I attain Buddhahood for the benefit of all beings. In the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Supreme Assembly, I take refuge until I attain enlightenment. Through the merit of practicing generosity and so on, may I attain Buddhahood for the benefit of all beings. In the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Supreme Assembly, I take refuge until I attain enlightenment. Through the merit of practicing generosity and so on, may I attain Buddhahood for the benefit of all beings. May all sentient beings enjoy happiness and the causes of happiness. May they be free from suffering and the causes of suffering. May they never be separated from the sacred happiness devoid of suffering. And may they dwell in boundless equanimity that is free from attachment and aversion. As the union of unborn emptiness and the ceaseless appearances of interdependence, magically there appears before me in the sky, amidst vast clouds of offerings, on a jewel-lined throne and lotus sun and moon disk seats, the incomparable teacher lion of the Shakyas. His body the color of gold, adorned with major and minor marks. Clad in the 3 Dharma robes, he sits in Vajra posture. his right hand gracefully poised in the earth-touching mudra, and his left hand in the gesture of meditation, holding an alms bowl full of nectar. Like a mountain of gold, magnificent he shines in splendor, spreading beams of wisdom light across the whole expanse of space. The 8 close sons, 16 elders, and the like, a vast ocean-like retinue of noble beings encircles him all around. Simply think of him and he grants the glory of the highest bliss, liberation from samsara and nirvana, the two extremes. He is the great being, perfect embodiment of every source of refuge. With your great compassion, you embraced this turbulent and degenerate world and made 500 mighty aspirations. You are as exalted as the white lotus. Whoever hears your name shall never return to samsara. Most compassionate teacher, to you I pay homage. All my own and others' virtues, the body, speech, and mind, together with all our possessions, visualized like Samantabhadra's offering clouds, I offer to you. All the harmful actions and transgressions I have committed throughout beginningless time, each and every one I now confess with intense and heartfelt regret. In all virtuous actions of the noble ones and ordinary beings, accumulated throughout past, present, and future, I rejoice. Turn the wheel of the profound and vast Dharma teaching ceaselessly and in every direction, I pray. Your wisdom body is like space and remains changeless throughout past, present, and future. Yet in the perception of those to be guided, you go through the display of birth and death. Even so, let your form body continue always to appear. Through all the virtues I have accumulated in the past, I am accumulating now, and will accumulate in the future, for the sake of benefiting all beings who are as infinite as space. May you, the sovereign of Dharma, be forever pleased, and may all attain the state of the victorious one, the Lord of Dharma. Living beings like us, adrift in this degenerate age, have no guidance nor protection. Because of your kindness, caring for us with surpassing compassion, every manifestation in this world now of the three jewels is your enlightened activity. You are then our only refuge, incomparable, supreme. So from our hearts we pray with total confidence and faith. Do not neglect the great promises you made in times gone by, but hold us until we attain enlightenment with your compassion. Supreme Teacher Bhagavan, Tathagata, Arhat, complete and perfect Buddha, glorious conqueror, Shakyamuni Buddha, to you I pay homage, to you I make offerings, in you I take refuge. Supreme Teacher Bhagavan, Tathagata, Arhat, complete and perfect Buddha, glorious conqueror, Shakyamuni Buddha, to you I pay homage, to you I make offerings, in you I take refuge. Supreme Teacher Bhagavan, Arhat, complete and perfect Buddha, glorious conqueror, Shakyamuni Buddha, to you I pay homage, to you I make offerings, in you I take refuge. Te yadao muni muni mahamunaya soha. Te yadao muni muni mahamunaya soha. Te yadao muni muni mahamunaya soha. Deyata 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 Muni Muni Mahamunaya Soha. Om 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 Muni Muni Maha Munaya Soha. From the Buddha's body there emanates a great radiance, a multicolored rays of wisdom light, dispelling all our own and others' obscurations and causing all the genuine qualities of the Mahayana path to rise within us, so that we attain the level of perfection from which we will never return again to samsara. The miraculous display of the unsurpassable wisdom appears as the intentions, deeds, prayers, knowledge, love, and ability of all the Sugatas and their children. May all beings become exactly like them. And then the prayer of Maitreya. Oh, oh. I prostrate to all the Buddhas and to the Bodhisattvas, endowed with the divine eye of the sages, and to the Shravakas as well. I prostrate to Bodhicitta, which counteracts birth in all lower realms, perfectly shows the path to the higher realms, and leads to no aging nor death. Whatever negative actions I have done under the influence of an afflicted mind, in the presence of the Buddhas, I fully acknowledge them all. By the accumulation of any merit I have created through the three kinds of activities, may my seed of omniscience grow, and may I attain awakening that never ends. Whatever offerings to the Buddhas that can be found in realms of the 10 directions are known to the Buddhas who rejoice in them. I rejoice in all these offerings. I fully acknowledge all negative actions and rejoice in all merit. I prostrate to all the Buddhas. May I attain supreme primordial wisdom. I earnestly request the Bodhisattvas who reside on the 10 levels in all the direction of the worlds in the 10 directions to awaken into supreme enlightenment. Once you have awakened into genuine enlightenment and tamed the Maras and their hordes, may you turn the wheel of Dharma so that all living beings may be healed. With the sound of the great Dharma drum, may you free all sentient beings who are suffering. Throughout inconceivable millions of kalpas, may you remain and teach the Dharma. Mired in the swamp of desire, entangled in the strands of cyclic existence, I am fettered by all that binds. I supplicate those supreme among humans to look upon me. The Buddhas do not blame sentient beings who are flawed. With a loving heart for all sentient beings, may the Buddhas free them from the ocean of cyclic existence. Any perfect Buddhas who are present, those who have passed away and those yet to come, may I train following in their way and engage in enlightened conduct. Having perfected the 6 paramitas, may I liberate the 6 families of sentient beings. Having actualized the 6 extraordinary faculties, may I reach unexcelled enlightenment. Future phenomena are not born, and those past will not occur. Present phenomena have no inherent nature. There is no actual location. There is no perception. There are no outer things. May I realize the Dhammadhatu of emptiness. According to the Buddhas, the great sages, there are no truly existent sentient beings, no life force. There is no truly existent individual and no nurturing of self. May I realize the Dhammadhatu where the self is not present. An entity such as grasping onto a self and mind is not present within any of the paramitas. To benefit all sentient beings, may I give with generosity free of avarice. Since things do not exist as entities, may my wealth appear spontaneously. Since all things totally disintegrate, may I perfect the paramita of generosity. Endowed with a flawless ethics that is guided by rules and an ethics that is completely pure. With an ethics free of an arrogant mind, may I perfect the paramita of ethics. Just as the elements of earth, water, fire, and wind, bodhisattvas do not remain caught by mental constructs. By attaining patience, anger never arises. May I perfect the paramita of patience. Through the power of previous perseverance, having become stable, enthusiastic, and free of laziness, and through a strong body and mind, may I perfect the paramita of perseverance. Through the samadhi where all is illusion-like, through the samadhi of the hero's stride, and through the samadhi that is like a vajra, may I perfect the paramita of meditative concentration. Through actualizing the 3 gates of full liberation, the equal nature of the 3 times, and the 3 types of knowing as well, may I perfect the paramita of prajna. Through persevering in the bodhisattva's practice, may I attain the kaya praised by all the Buddhas, the luminous kaya, the kaya blazing with majesty. Thus may my intention be fulfilled. May I be like the famed Maitreya, who engaged in such a practice, perfected the paramitas, and perfectly abides at the zenith of the 10th level. By this merit, may all attain omniscience, may it defeat the enemy wrongdoing. From the stormy waves of birth, old age, sickness, and death, from the ocean of samsara, may all beings be freed. May bodhicitta, precious and sublime, arise where it has not yet come to be, and where it has arisen, may it never fail, but grow and flourish ever more and more. May the Buddha appear in this world. May the light of the teaching shine like the sun. May the holders of the teaching live in harmony, and thus may all be auspicious for the teaching to endure. We pray for the good health of the teachers. We pray for their precious lives to be long. We pray for their activities to spread and increase. May we be blessed never to part from the teachings. Akashasya stiti avat yavacha jagataha stiti tavan mama stiti bhuyaha jagadukani nidnataha. Akashasya stiti avat yavacha jagataha stiti tavam mama stiti bhuyaha jagadukani nidnataha. Tavam mama stiti bhuyaha jagadukani nidnataha. Tavam mama stiti bhuyaha jagadukani nidnataha. As long as space remains, as long as the world remains, may I too remain to alleviate the sufferings of the world. Thank you very much. So, see you again, hopefully. Permanence allowing. Okay.